Welcome back to Theopoetics and Glitter, where theology is lived out. Theopoetics is more than religion. It's discovering God not only through doctrine, but also through our stories, creativity, joy, even scars, and the sacred rhythm of everyday life. The glitter part? Well, that's just my embodiment of that truth. See, I shine not for attention, but as a reflection of what I carry, the light. So today we conclude our series on the five womanist building blocks of self-esteem. Through this journey, we have explored self-definition. We define ourselves for ourselves through the story of Hagar. Divine recognition. God sees me through the woman at the well. Survival and flourishing. My resilience is sacred and sacred storytelling. My life is a testimony. The Syrophoenician woman. Today, we arrive at the fifth and final womanist building block of self esteem community affirmation. I am strengthened by others. This final building block reminds us that self esteem is not built in isolation. We need community, we need encouragement, we need wisdom. We need people who can see our gifts when we cannot. We need people who remind us who we are when life tries to convince us that we ain't nothing. Womanist theology has long recognized that individual healing and collective healing are connected. Our guide today will be Abigail. Now, you can find Abigail's story in 1 Samuel 25, verses 2 through 42. A woman whose wisdom prevented violence, preserved lives, and transformed the life of a nation. Okay, so before we get into the whole story about, that thing, what is community affirmation? So let's define it, okay? The womanist definition of community affirmation is the process through which individuals experience encouragement, validation, support, accountability, recognition within relationships and communities that nurture their dignity and growth. Notice that this is a synergistic relationship, right? Okay, so now as we're talking about community affirmation contains a couple of other elements. One of those things is communal wisdom. That's knowledge that is developed through shared experiences, collective memory, and intergenerational learning. And then there is mutuality. And that's the understanding that human flourishing occurs through reciprocal care, support, and responsibility. In other words, we helping each other. We doing the same things for each other. Womanist theology rejects the myth of radical individualism. The idea that we succeed entirely on our own is neither historical nor biblical. Black communities have always understood that we survive together, we heal together, we rise together. Self esteem grows when people experience affirmation from healthy communities. So, now let's talk about Abigail for a minute. The story of Abigail, and again, it is in 1 Samuel 25, reminds us of one of the deepest truths of womanist theology. We do not survive alone. Our healing is connected, our flourishing is connected, our liberation is connected. Our gifts, our wisdom, our survival are never just personal. What God places within us is often meant to strengthen the community around us. Have you ever seen an apple tree eat an apple? I know you haven't. And Abigail shows us what happens when one woman's wisdom becomes the salvation of many. Now, before we get any deeper into Abigail, we do need to talk about her husband, Nabal. Yes, we need to talk about her husband, and there is a lot to say because Nabal was a lot. Now, Nabal had a lot of money. Nabal had a lot of resources and had a lot of influence. But He had a lot of possessions, but what he did not have was good sense. See, David and his men had protected Nabal's shepherds and his property. When David sent a request for provisions, he expected generosity and hospitality. Instead, Nabal responded with disrespect, and that disrespect created a crisis. Foolishness rarely stays with the person who creates it. One person's pride can become everybody's problem. One person's poor choices can put an entire community at risk. David was angry, very angry, the kind of angry where you've already decided what you're going to do before wisdom has had a chance to catch up. David strapped on his sword and he prepares his men and his animals and he's taken off and he has declared that he will not rest until everybody in Nabal's household is eliminated. And that is when Abigail steps into the picture. Now, the Bible describes Abigail as intelligent and beautiful, but let's be clear. Abigail's greatest power was not her appearance. Her greatest power was her wisdom, her ability to see beyond herself. Abigail understood that community matters. Abigail could have gone and said, you know what? Nabal is a hot mess. I'm going to let him deal with that. I ain't got time. But she didn't just think about herself, she didn't just ignore the consequences. Abigail understood that when the community is threatened, somebody has to step forward. So she gathers provisions, she organizes resources, she moves with urgency, and she cuts David off at the pass. The thing I love about this is that she does not show up with a sword, she shows up with wisdom. No anger for anger. She answers destruction with the possibility of life. Abigail speaks to David and reminds him that the choices that he makes today affect more than just this moment. She challenges him not to allow one foolish man's behavior to turn him into someone that he was not called to become. In other words, Abigail said, David, don't let one man's foolishness steal your future. And this is community affirmation. Community affirmation is recognizing that our lives are connected. It understands that our gifts are not only for our own survival, but for the survival and flourishing of the community. Abigail doesn't just save her household, she saves David from himself. She reminds him that power must be guided by purpose. She reminds him that anger does not have to have the final say. And can we just take a moment and give Abigail her flowers because Abigail was out here doing crisis management before anybody had created that as a job title. She walked into chaos and said, all right, since everybody else has lost their mind, I'm going to come on and step in with some good sense. And that's what happens when wisdom enters the room. Sometimes God sends holy interruptions. Sometimes God sends people who have the courage to stand between destruction and the people who need protecting. Sometimes God sends people who say, we are not going to let one person's foolishness destroy everybody else. So that's what we have to say about that. Crisis management, peace building, protection, strategy. That's community affirmation. And there is power in speaking life. And this is what Abigail did. One of the things that I really like about this story is that she spoke into David's future. She encountered David before he was the king, but she knew that God had called him to something greater. So she helps him see beyond his anger. She helps him to avoid a decision that would have damaged his integrity. This is community affirmation. Community affirmation is not flattery. It is not empty praise. It is not helping people ignore the reality, but it is helping people become their best selves. Sometimes affirmation means encouragement, but sometimes affirmation affirmation means accountability. Sometimes affirmation means reminding someone of their purpose when they forget that they have one. Many of us can identify people who changed our lives simply because they believed in us. I'm reminded of the story that Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson told about when she was at in undergrad at her Ivy League university. She was feeling discouraged and thinking about giving up and quitting and going back home. And she saw this woman coming down the sidewalk, an older black woman. She was dressed as if she was a domestic worker. And as she passed that woman looked her dead in her eyes and she said, "Persevere." And that's what Abigail did for David. See, community affirmation is really what sustained our ancestors. This is also a building block that is deeply rooted in our history. Our ancestors survived because they built communities of affirmation. Enslaved people cared for one another despite impossible circumstances. Families shared resources. Churches became centers of encouragement and education. Mutual aid societies emerged. Historically, Black colleges and universities nurtured future leaders. Community organizations fought for justice. Black women were the emotional architects of these spaces. We organized meals, education, worship, the organized resistance. This is what they did. This is what we do. This is what we need. They affirmed the worth of people whom society continuously demeaned. When the larger community said, "You do not matter," the community responded, "You belong here." When society said, "You cannot succeed," the community said, "We believe in you." Community affirmation became a survival strategy. Our ancestors understood how community strengthens people. So, what can community affirmation do for us today? Today, today, y'all. There is so much going on in the world. There are so many attacks coming toward our community. We forget that social media and all of these things that we stream and do and all of that, that's that's kind of community, but it's not really until we get face to face and share each other's energy. Many of us are lonely despite the appearance of being constantly connected. Some of us are concerned about efforts to basically just wipe out our history and take away our civil rights, our educational access, and even getting close to social equality. In moments like these, community becomes even more important. Our ancestors did not wait for systems to affirm them. Our ancestors did not wait. They affirmed one another. They built institutions. They formed networks. They created support systems. They cultivated hope. And I am reminded of this young lady, and I do not know her name, but who is a sound technician and removed the background noise from that CETO call. Y'all know what I'm talking about. When systems refused to do that, an individual who cares about her community took it upon herself to do that. The lesson is not dependency, the lesson is interdependence. We need each other. As communities face uncertainty, the question becomes, how can we become affirming communities ourselves? How can we create spaces where people feel valued, seen, supported? How can we help others flourish? I'm going to tell you what I think. I'm going to tell you what I think, how we can do it. Okay. The first thing that we can do is to speak life into other people. How do you speak life into other people? You offer encouragement. You see them. You choose to nurture rather than diminish. I do that. When I was 12, I walked down to the public library in my flip flops and with my library card because I had one. And I checked out a book on psychology. Yes, at 12 years old, I checked out a book on psychology. And what I read in that book on child psychology was that children need positive strokes. I never forgot that because I believe that as a child, I knew I needed positive strokes. And I walked home from the library carrying my book, encouraging myself by telling myself that I had to get them to give me positive strokes. They're going to give me positive strokes and everything's going to be all right. That's what I believe. But that didn't necessarily happen. But because of that, I am the queen of positive strokes, baby. I am going to tell you something that's going to encourage you. I'm going to speak into your life. I am going to, oh my goodness. Listen, if you have on some bright colors, and for some of us, especially those of us who are richly melanated, we have been told that we should not wear bright colors. So, because I know what that feels like, and if I see you in some bright colors, I'm going to say, yes, sis, you better rock that red dress. Yes, girl, that pink looks perfect on you. Man, I tell you what, you look all right in that coat. You got to do it differently with men. But I'm going to pour into people because I know what it feels like when you're empty. And another thing that you can do is accept encouragement. I have struggled with receiving affirmation, with people saying kind things to me, complimenting me, I blow it off and flip it. But I'm learning how to accept it because when I accept it, I am affirmed and it lifts me up. Also, seek wise counsel. Everybody needs an Abigail, but everybody that's trying to give you advice ain't an Abigail. Wisdom is the determining factor. So seek wise counsel and then become an Abigail. Use your wisdom to help others navigate difficult seasons. One of the reasons why you are seeing my face right now, if you are seeing it, is because I believe that I have experienced something that if I share it with others, it will help them along their journey. And that's all I'm trying to do. And then you can invest in community. Strong communities do not happen accidentally, they are built intentionally. How do you build community? You seek like minded individuals. Talk to them, get to know them, meet them. And then if you just start out with one person, you and one more person, that's a community. Do what you do. And then somebody else might come along and they have the same interests or questions or enjoyment. And before you know it, you keep growing. Remember that commercial from back in the day? I told two friends and they told two friends and so on and so on and so on. And that's how it happens. So, community affirmation. So, for our reflection questions, who has affirmed you during difficult seasons? I'm not going to share any stories on any of these questions because I have too many stories to share. And if I start, I'll go way too long. What has community, see, I do it every time. How has community, I need some new glasses, and my daughter in law, if she ever watches this, she's going to really be mad because she knows that I'm not wearing the most recent prescription because she was my She was my tech at the optometrist place. She know these are not my most recent prescription, but the most recent prescription is a very fancy schmancy pair of glasses, and they're heavy, so I don't wear them. I'm gonna get another pair. Anyway, how has community shaped your self-esteem? Where do you need greater support? Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about this because we don't want to acknowledge the places where we need support. It's almost like that thing where I have a hard time taking compliments. But I want you to really focus on that question. And I want you to ask yourself honestly, where do you need greater community support? Where do you need greater support? What would help you in those times when you feel shaky? What is it that you need that would encourage you and make you more confident to pursue whatever it is that you're afraid to pursue? Be honest with yourself. You don't have to discuss that with me, but I would even encourage you to make that a journal prompt. Okay. Number four, how can you become a source of affirmation for others? I just did that. So just remember what I just said. Write some of that stuff down. Take some notes. I keep saying I'm going to have a journal. By season two, I'm going to have a journal in the wherever you go to look at this thing here, because I don't know, but I'm gonna have a journal that you can click on and download, and it'll be digital, and you can just keep some notes, and it'll have the reflection questions and all that kind of stuff there. Anyway, last reflection question: what lesson from our ancestors can strengthen our communities today? I have to speak to that. I have to speak to that because the lesson from our ancestors that can strengthen us today is to protect each other, to stand with each other, to stand for each other, to stand by each other. I could go on, but I won't. So, Abigail reminds us that wisdom can change history. One woman's courage prevented violence, one woman's discernment preserved lives. None of us arrived here alone. Somebody prayed for us. Somebody encouraged us and taught us and corrected us. Somebody believed in us. Somebody helped us survive. Somebody helped us flourish. Our ancestors understood this truth. They built communities because they knew that isolated people are vulnerable, but connected people are resilient. As we conclude this series on the five womanist building blocks of self esteem, remember you have the right to define yourself for yourself. Remember that God sees you. Remember that your resilience is sacred. Your life is a testimony, and you are strengthened in community. These building blocks are not separate ideas, they work together. They form a foundation of healthy self esteem rooted in womanist wisdom, biblical faith, community strength, and ancestral resilience. May we honor those who came before us by building communities that affirm dignity, cultivate hope, nurture healing, and inspire future generations. May we become the kind of people who strengthen others simply by our presence. And may we never forget that God often works through community to remind us of our worth. So just remember that you are seen, you are valued. You are resilient. You are connected, and you do not have to walk this journey alone. We've come to the end of these five building blocks, but they were just the foundation. Now that we've built the foundation, let's talk about it. Talk about what? Everything. Next season, we're going to talk politics, culture, trending topics, spirituality, and maybe even a little bit of sports, but I doubt sports because I can't stand sports no more. That's a long story for another day. But we're going to do it all through a womanistic theopoetic lens. I just made that up. I want to bring experts, theologians, thought leaders, and regular people together to engage in conversation with us. And speaking of us, Friday nights. we will have a live chat where you can ask me and a topic guest questions. Now, don't forget to subscribe because we just gonna keep on going. Listen, I know I only have 16 subscribers, but I don't care. You 16 subscribers saw something that you wanted to keep hearing. So I'm gonna keep giving it. All right. Now I'm gonna end this the way I always end everything that I do. Start your healing journey as soon as possible. In order to start your healing journey, you must first acknowledge that there is something from which you need to heal. Once you do that, start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. And you can do that the same way that you can eat the entire world. And that is one bite at a time. Deuces.